I'm here with Andrew of My Dying Bride to talk about Immortal Binding, out April 19th on Nuclear Blast. I've talked to a few guys from My Dying Bride over the years, Aaron included, whenever it came to an album cycle, an album release. But this is the first time that the two of us get to sit down and talk. So welcome to the channel and thank you for taking the time.
No, thank you. It's a great service that you provide, and I'm very happy to be here.
So let's talk about this record because I felt that coming in, I was expecting one thing, and then the album offered me something slightly different from what my expectations were. And the album offered me a more dynamic, a more open sound experience than previous records, specifically the previous album. Was this something that happened throughout the creative process, or did you guys sit down and said, okay, let's create a little bit more of a big sounding, almost cinematic at times record?
I can answer the last part first because we definitely didn't plan for cinematic. We definitely didn't plan for the outcome from the mix, if you will. But what we did plan when we were rehearsing, which we did plenty of, is step one was immediately try and make it as different as possible without ruining anything from A Ghost of Orion. We had to make a new album, and we knew that that was step one, which is somewhat normal. But what we decided pretty early on, I had some riffs here. That this is where I record some of my stuff that were larger than normal, that were big, chunky, sort of just standard. They were My Dying Bride, but there were a bit more aggression to them, a bit more pronounced, let's say. So we liked that. We thought, well, we'll just stick with this. We'll just go back to basics. We like big riffs, so we'll do big riffs, and we'll bring in some pinch harmonics, which we haven't used for a while. They're fairly aggressive, and we just wrote something organic to us, very natural feeling, but with a kind of back to basic feel, where we didn't do long. Well, some of the songs are long, but we haven't done any deliberately long, dark, orchestrated moments. We haven't brought in any third. Like female vocals this time, and no extra musicians on cello or anything like that, which we did on Ghost. And we just the result is obviously that's I think we've got a nice result with the mix, but I would be disingenuous to think or pretend to you now that that's how we planned it. That wasn't the game. We had a rough idea in rehearsal how it should sound, and we tried. We just wanted it to be big, pretty bold. We know we're known for being sort of slow and sort of miserable, and we wanted to sort of mix that up a little bit. And we tried to revive some of the old ideas that we'd forgot that we used to do, going back to pinch harmonics, using feedback as a riff method with just drums and bass underneath. We haven't done that for some time, and we just we just had fun with it. It was a heavy metal band that does our style of music, doing our style of heavy metal.
When I got the album to listen to do my review, I was actually traveling. I was going to Norway, and I thought perfect timing. I have like, I don't know, a 7-hour flight. I have plenty of time to sit down and really digest, because I don't feel like My Dying Bride is the kind of band that makes music like McDonald's. Like it's not fast food. Like you need to take the time to sit down and really dig deep into it and dive deep into it. And I had that time. The first song comes on, Her Dominion, and I was like, wow, this is heavy, like really heavy. And then almost immediately, as soon as that song finished, the next track takes the mood very down, like sharply down. And I thought that was a very interesting, abrupt way of shaking the listener right from the get-go, and then taking you in a different direction. Putting this track listing together, was this difficult in order to create an album that has peaks and valleys, that has jolts, but at the same time still offers some sort of a cohesiveness?
It was, and in the end, the band, which we took as a kind of a good sign, actually, we couldn't come up with we're sort of semi-democratic. We try vote our way through things most of the time, and we couldn't with this. We couldn't. No one could agree which order it should be. Which we thought, well, that's okay, because each one is somewhat different to the next. So we just left it to Mark, the producer, who engineered it and recorded it and mixed it and everything. And we said, look, we're happy with it. So far, we've got 6 versions of this, and we're happy with each one. So you, as an outsider, if you will, listen down. He knew the songs by this point. Obviously, we've been recording for a month. You dress them how you think it suits the album the best. And that's basically the result you got. So he sent that back to us. We thought, well, we can't agree. So this is the final result. So for us, it was. I don't think it's a bad lineup either, because I think Her Dominion does start well, and Thornwick, there's nothing wrong with that. Straight into Second of Three Bells, which slows it down. Then straight out of that into Apocalyptist. Can't argue with that. Then some massive pieces of doom at the end, just to make sure that you know who you thought if you drifted off at some point, you brought back to life, to reminded who's actually playing now. So I looked at it and I thought, you know, that's pretty, that'll do for me. We'll go with that. And so after that, we just left it. That was it. So
did you enjoy those choices right from the get-go? Because me personally, as a listener, it took me a few times to go through the record to adapt to some of the ebbs and flows that the record had, compared to Ghost was a little bit more linear in its movement.
yeah, well, it's slightly different. It's a slightly different experience for me, because firstly, I was struggling with the titles, because those aren't the titles we used for like 18 months, and then some of them got changed. So I'm trying to figure out which one's this. So we were relearning the titles, and then we once these songs started at such an early stage, we were instantly drawn into mix mode. So we're listening for things like gates, musical gates, you know, the electronic gates that don't shut, pops and clicks from vocals, odd snare hits that might be in the wrong place, guitar harmonies that are sat briefly out of phase or something like that. I think so. For us, you don't sort of sit back and go, or I couldn't anyway, and enjoy it as the album in the form. You're constantly sort of editing and being critical, and then straight onto an email. So, you know, 2 minutes 14, this song, something's taking place, and he'll find a weird insert or something doing something strange. After a while, without realizing it, that just became, in my opinion, the natural order. I didn't really have time at the very beginning to decide or to sort of contemplate whether it worked or not, because we were still too busy making sure everything was where it should be. But for me, it feels normal now. So I have to admit, I hope it feels normal for everybody else.
No, it felt normal for me after a few times going through it. Just that first time was a little bit jarring, and it kind of caught me off guard, like a Gary Pallister tackle.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we're talking Vinnie Jones now, so that's
yeah, more Vinnie Jones.
Yeah, so we'll do a Vinnie Jones opening, and then we'll bring you through with some you know, standard tackling later on. I mean, to be fair, I think Her Dominion probably was always going to be the opener, just because of the sort of immediate shock and heaviness of the beginning riff, and the sort of breakdown section with the death metal vocals, because we championed for ages and ages to get death metal vocals back on this, and then to have an opportunity for it to actually open the album, everybody was like, wow, yeah, that, leave it right there. So we were happy enough. And yeah, it's a shock, but it's still us. If you go back through our back catalogue, you can see this is not new. This is not necessarily new ground at all. For us, after 34 years or so, it's just refreshingly the same but different, you know, with a new mix.
You mentioned that you guys brought some elements like the feedback that hadn't been used in a while. I felt like the guitar sound overall on this record is so rich, so textured. It has like this incredible dense quality to it. Rediscovering some of those elements, are they now going to be staying for a little bit longer?
Yeah, I would have thought so. The tricky part of all of that is that we use very old equipment mixed with very new modern guitar processing and input responses, which everybody uses now. And it's finding the balance, because we have a rehearsal sound that we like it, but it's unrecordable. You know, it's just a row. It's just a racket basically, but we like it. And you try bring that into a studio, and obviously Mark's going, well, we're going to have to rethink this. We can get most of that, but it'll have to have a modern touch. So a lot of it is reamped, but perversely enough, the reamping that it gets are PV5150s with sort of standard Boss HM 1s and 2s. The sort of standard stuff, if you had a real lineup of equipment, we just dial it into the input responses and we take that out, but then you get a little bit more control. You can lose yourself in the weeds a little bit there and get lost with too many options. But the tricky part, I think we've learned over two albums and one EP now, where our guitar sound likes to reside in power, and sort of, because we all want crushing power, but it can be overwhelming and can break the song. I mean, and we're guilty of that. And Mark has to rein us back because we're just, well, regardless of our age, we're just still stupid kids that want it to be just make it heavy as fuck. Just make it heavy as fuck. That's all we're saying all the time. And he's going, yeah, but you'll ruin it. I'm here to stop you breaking it for yourself. So I think we've got a balance where it's heavy enough for what we need to achieve. I mean, I think it's heavy. I mean, it sounds pretty good to me. And yet you can still hear, this is something I like, behind the notes because of the delay and the reverbs that we've got, give it a clarity, but without squashing the note and making it too nasal, is the technical term. It's a hard, tricky game. Well, it really is. And I reckon we've probably got somewhere very close to almost the sound we would consider the My Dying Bride sound with a modern production.
The other aspect that I find always really interesting, specifically from not fans of My Dying Bride or fans of Doom, but metal fans that are on the periphery, they always look at the band or the genre as the music is boring, it's slow. I was listening to this album. This album was nothing. There's nothing slow about this record, and there's nothing boring about this record. You guys put together a very dynamic doom metal album. Do you feel sometimes that not just the band but the genre and the sound that you guys create doesn't get the proper recognition?
I wouldn't dare say that myself, but what I would say is I think it's criminally misunderstood. Those that don't fully, because Doom is massive now. Before it was just it was fairly large, but it was relatively from a musical aspect. There was only a few gauges of Doom, if you will, and then it moved into, we had stoner Doom, and then we had the sort of a psychedelic Doom and these kind of things, all very similar approaches. And then you get things like Sun O, which is a different level of Doom. And then you've all got the Candlemasses and the going back to the ancient sort of Doom bands with not Paradise Lost, with Black Sabbath and Paradise Lost being a version of very different talents of Doom, somewhat moving out of Doom in certain times. So it's almost impossible for those that don't follow it with any real vigor, let's say, to understand precisely that it's massive now. It's almost unquantifiable. You can't just say it's slow and monotonous, because yes, there are bands like that. I mean, there are brilliant ones as well. And then you get our version and you get Candlemas, who are very different, very dynamic, but just go for powerful, big, sort of bombastic riffs somewhat. And our version, which is a little darker, I suppose, than Candlemas. It's probably impossible for anybody to really say, right, okay, we've got a pigeonhole and we'll just put Doom in there and squeeze all the Doom sort of subgenres in there. It would be tricky. I think it is, particularly My Dying Bride, we are, I think, precisely where we should be. I don't think we should be any bigger. We're not, our music doesn't demand that. We're not a pop band. We're not trying to, I mean, we've just done the Apocalyptis is 11 minutes long again, and everybody in the band is going, that should be the video. And Nuclear Blast are going, it's 11 minutes long, you clowns. It's never being the video. So we fucking immediately shot ourselves in the foot with that, but we don't care. So I think doom metal as I'm not saying the sort of the self-inflicted wounds. We know what we're doing, and we know it's going this far. So whether it's underrepresented or misunderstood by the normies, let's say, probably so. But it is precisely what it is, and I can't see radio suddenly pouncing on doom and going, we're going to play loads of this now because we've recognized its quality. And to be fair, it would probably lose its shine if it was released into the wider world. It would suddenly be very different, I think. Maybe not as good as it presently is.
The band has an incredible discography. You guys have been around for a very long time. Does that discography weigh heavily on your shoulders when it comes to being creative and perhaps change slightly the direction or where you might want to go from album to album?
It only in the sense of we have to avoid ourselves more because of the back catalogue. In the sense when I mentioned earlier that when we were recording or writing this album and rehearsing, we're constantly aware of A Ghost of Orion and Feel the Misery. Those two particularly, because they're right next door. And obviously, then when you go back and you've got all the back catalogue and you remember all of them, Christ Almighty. So it's tricky in the sense of or it weighs heavy that you've got to avoid, or we try avoid repeating ourselves. And yet still you've got to be My Dying Bride. You can't really move too far away, and nor would we want to. That's probably the only rod for our own back we've made by having a back catalogue like that. It's just, sometimes you second guess yourself and you can sort of outthink yourself, and it can be pointlessly tricky. All you're trying to do is not do Turn Loose the Swans, which you couldn't ever do anyway, or The Angel. You can take essences of what made them successful, but you can't be caught doing it again. We couldn't do that. I mean, that would be bad. So that doesn't help. If it was our first album, we'd be really quite chuffed with it.
And Aaron is phenomenal on vocals on this album. What's the reason for his success, or his ability to continue to put out vocal performances like he did on this record?
Because we moan at him to do it like that, and we're the most critical people in the band. And if so, when the vocals are going in, we're saying, no, we want death metal vocals there, and we know that clean vocals are going to work there, and we want death metal. And let's face it, he's also got a rod made quite readily for his own back on all the past albums. And I think what really adds to it, though, is because the mix and the mastering are so precise now, and the band is so well disciplined and so professionally recorded, you can't be sat on top of all of that and put in a half-assed performance. It's got to match the rest, and we tune in, so he's got to be tuned in. So that's where it gets tricky for him. And obviously, and Mark, just to add a final joke, is merciless. Mark the Merciless, we might even start calling him. And I can assure you, he takes no prisoners in the recording studio. If you're out by a fraction of a any kind of cent of a note, he's onto you and you're doing it again. And so the performance is part discipline and part brutality.
When I was listening to this record, I could see that, and it's always been the case with My Dying Bride for me, the guitars and vocals are the two cornerstones, the two pillars that really build the overall sound that I'm going to get. And that's not to take anything away from drums or bass. I just feel like that's where my cornerstones are. But this record, the bass popped a lot. Like, it's not hidden, it's not in the background, like, it's noticeable, but not in a bad way either. It's noticeable in a way that adds great texture, it adds darkness to the songs, and it really feels like it has a role to play. Obviously it does have a role to play, but it's not hidden, is what I'm trying to say. Was that from the production standpoint that it was a necessity, or there's more to it, having the bass this predominant?
We decided that very early in the rehearsals. It wasn't a production decision. The bass guitar, we felt, had lost something on the last album, or was overlooked, let's say. So what we started to do was, because we were doing 3-part harmonies, 2 guitars, and sometimes 4-part with violin, and the bass would play a singular harmony, and I would write here, and Lena's very capable, but I would give her sort of a starting point and then just leave her to it. But then when we were starting to listen to the bass, we thought, well, it sounds like a bass. Let's give it some teeth. Let's give it a little bit of harshness. So we've got some equipment in, of course, and we started to fiddle with that. And we kind of liked where this was going. I'm an old school bass kind of. We joke in the band that the bass should be seen and not heard. That's it. But we decided against that this time. So we discussed that the bass should be in, and this is partially why, particularly on Per Dominion, that the bass gets a driving role along with the drums, and this is why we have a feedback section, because we want connoisseurs would be able to hear the bass under all that row, but we wanted it to be heard without the row, so the guitars lift themselves away. Here's the bass, for bass guitarists, and she obviously loves that part. And then on the other songs, we've got 3-part harmonies where the bass is playing a singular harmony, which the guitars then rotate in and amongst around. We've probably overthought all of this. No one's ever going to notice these things, but bass guitarists will hear it. They'll latch onto this. She's not just plodding along mindlessly playing the riff. She is playing her own parts, not all the time, but and then locked in with the drums, and then sometimes leaving the drums and doing a harmony and coming back to it. We thought, why not? I mean, it worked spectacularly in rehearsal, and then when we actually record it and you could hear it clearly, we were on the right track. So, and it just worked. So it's quite by design. It was, I think like I said, we do we do sort of take the mick out of the bass that he should have, but we decided against it on the album for reasons.
It's nice to have an album that breaks a little bit of the mold and offers this new texture, this new sound, because it makes the overall experience richer. And that's how I felt listening to the album. It didn't feel like a bass; it almost felt like a third guitar at times.
Yeah, well, quite by design, as I mentioned. I mean, regardless of My Dying Bride be a doom and gloom outfit musically, and as topics are a little bit, sour sometimes, the ultimate role for My Dying Bride for us is to make us happy, to put a smile on us face, which might sound sort of some sort of an oxymoron, or oxymoronic. So when you've got a bassist as capable as ours, as Lena quite clearly is, just tucked away in the shadows, you think, well, let's not, let it shine. And I know you can't, we're not Iron Maiden, so we're having bass over everything. We're not doing that. So it didn't distract from what was taking place. It was, like, as you said, like a third harmony for those that love those types of things. And she's now, that's me. I did that. Whereas before it's sort of buried in the mix, going, well, I'm in there somewhere. No. She's, as a prominent player, visibly. Neil's got his parts, I've got my parts. The drums bash straight through everything. Aaron sat along the top, keyboards and vocal, violin in and amongst, weaving in, the tapestry of the sort of misery aspect of it. Everybody has a nice shine, a spotlight on them on this album. And I think everybody performed better knowing that was the case as well. There was no illusions of how everybody was going to be focused on this from a mix point of view. We knew this, we'd spoke about this. And when we got to the studio, Mark was given some guidelines, if you will, of, this is how we want it to take place. And he's a genius. I kid you not, if anybody's listening to this or watching this that has opportunity to record with him, go. It won't be a mistake.
Last question for you. The album is coming out April 19th. I know you guys had some plans for some shows. I heard that some of them might be scrapped. So what's the life on the road or live shows as far as the band is concerned for the rest of the year? Are you guys putting that on pause?
It's going to have to be temporarily. We've got some problems, some live problems, let's say, but I don't have all the information myself. So I've got to be very caged about an official response, because we haven't gotten, in fact, we're working on an official response with Nuclear Blast. So we have got some sort of ruffles to sort of iron out, if you will. It's not the end of the world, though. There'll be a statement later on, and we'll figure it out. We normally do. So yeah, it's sad for those shows that may get cancelled, but it's not the end of the world. And like you said, the album comes out it's this Friday, so at least something good, to look forward to.
Yeah. There's some new music to listen to and something to keep everyone entertained, and hoping for better and brighter days ahead, and seeing you guys perform some of these new songs live. Andrew, thank you very much for your time and your patience in dealing with us when we do one of the reaction videos of your band, and we talk about
cool.
Men United. Now that you know you're a Liverpool fan, I'll throw in some Liverpool references next time around.
Cool, right, brilliant. I grew up on the Liverpool that had Kenny Dalglish up front.
Oh, I remember those days.
Yeah, I had a signed poster on my wall. It was my pride and joy for many years.
It's really bad. You're right. When you talk about these players, we really end up dating ourselves, because on that video, when I mentioned Gary Pallister, my son's face was like, "Who's that?" He had no idea who I was talking about.
Yeah. Me and my brother knew straight away, because we were talking about. I said, "They're talking about Gary Pallister now." No one knows who that is.
That's not something you hear every day when somebody listens to My Dying Bride. Gary Pallister comes up.
Absolutely not. Yeah, he was a miserable defender.
I agree with you on that. Thank you very much, Andrew. Have a wonderful day, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you very much.
Bye.